April 1945. A prison camp 50 miles east of the Rhine River, Germany. 87 German women stood in the cold morning air waiting. Their hands were numb, their hearts pounded. They knew what was coming. An American officer walked down the line. He stopped. He looked at them. And then he gave an order that made their blood turn to ice. Open your coat. 3 words. That was all. What happened next was not what any of them expected. In fact, it was the complete opposite. This is a true story, and by the end you'll understand why sometimes the enemy in your mind is far worse than the enemy in front of you. Bavaria, February 1945. The world was ending in pieces. Martha Klein sat in a small room with concrete walls and a single window. Outside, the sky glowed orange, not from sunrise, from fires burning 40 kilometers away. She could hear the distant thunder of artillery. It never stopped anymore. Day and night. Thunder without rain. She wore a gray auxiliary uniform, wool that scratched her neck. Her hands moved across the radio equipment in front of her. Morse code, dots and dashes. Messages that came faster now, more desperate. She typed each one into her logbook with careful precision. Her handwriting was small and neat. The daughter of a school teacher, trained to be careful. The message she was typing now made her hand pause. 4th Panzer Division reports American advance 10 kilometers per hour. Requesting immediate evacuation orders. Awaiting response. There was no response. There hadn't been a response for 3 days. Martha looked at her hands. They were shaking. Not from the cold, from something else. Something she didn't want to name. She was 22 years old. She had volunteered for signals training in 1943 after her mother died in the Dresden bombing. She remembered the recruiter's words. You'll be serving your country. You'll be doing something that matters. You'll be safe behind the lines. Behind the lines. That phrase meant nothing now. There were no lines anymore. Just collapse, just retreat, just the slow, grinding certainty that everything was falling apart. Through the window, she could see trucks moving on the road below, soldiers walking, some without weapons, some without boots, refugees with carts and children, all moving west, away from the thunder. Martha turned back to her radio. Another message was coming through. American forces crossing at Remagen. All units withdraw immediately. No reinforcements available. She typed it into her log. Her glasses slipped down her nose. She pushed them back up with one finger. The frames were bent. She'd been wearing them for 3 years. There was no money for new ones. No time. No anything. A door opened behind her. Sergeant Holzer stepped in. He was 45, gray at the temples, tired eyes. He'd been kind to her, almost fatherly. Klein, he said, pack your things. We're moving out in 20 minutes. Martha looked up at him. Moving where west? Same as everyone else. She stood. Her chair scraped against concrete. What about the radio? Leave it. But the messages? There's no one left to send them to. He paused, and no one left to receive them. 200 kilometers north in the Ruhr Valley. Eleanor Schmidt sat behind the wheel of a military truck. Everyone called her Ellie. No one had called her Eleanor since her wedding day in 1940. The truck was an Opel Blitz, 3 tons, painted in fading Wehrmacht gray. She'd been driving trucks like this since 1942. First for a supply depot, then for a medical unit, now for whoever needed driving. The assignments changed. The job stayed the same. Keep your hands on the wheel. Keep your eyes forward. Don't look at the faces. The road ahead was clogged. Refugees, soldiers, horses, carts piled high with furniture and children. Everything moving in the same direction, slow, desperate, like a river of people that would never reach the sea. Ellie honked the horn. No one moved. She honked again. A woman with a baby turned and screamed something. Ellie couldn't hear the words over the engine noise. Didn't matter. She'd heard them all before. She was 28 years old, broad shoulders, strong hands, a small scar on her forehead from when she was 12 and fell off her father's truck. Her husband had died at Stalingrad in 1942. No body, no grave, just a letter that said missing, presumed dead. She'd kept the letter in her coat pocket for 6 months. Then she burned it. Keeping it wouldn't bring him back. She drove because someone had to, because sitting still meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering, and remembering meant pain. The convoy ahead finally moved. Ellie shifted gears and followed. The truck rattled. The suspension was shot. Everything was shot. The whole country was shot. In the back of her truck, 8 women sat on wooden benches. Radio operators, clerks, a typist, a cook, all assigned to her convoy when their units dissolved. No one knew where they were going. No one asked. Asking didn't change anything. One of the women leaned forward and tapped on the cab window. Ellie glanced back. It was Greta the translator. Young, maybe 26, spoke 4 languages, always polite. How much longer? Greta shouted through the glass. Ellie shrugged. As long as it takes. Greta sat back. Ellie returned her eyes to the road. The sky above was gray. It was always gray now. Smoke, clouds, ash. The sun was a rumor. She tightened her grip on the wheel and kept driving. Frankfurt, January 1945. Clara Weiss had wanted to be a nurse since she was 14. Her father had been a doctor, a good one, gentle hands, calm voice. She'd watched him treat patients in their home when she was small, watched him clean wounds and set bones and whisper reassurance. He made pain smaller. He made fear quiet. He died of a heart attack in 1944, died in his office with his stethoscope still around his neck. Clara found him. She was 18. After the funeral, she volunteered for the medical auxiliary, not because she wanted to serve the Reich, because she wanted to do what her father had done: heal, help, make pain smaller. They sent her to a field hospital near the front. She thought it would be like her father's practice: clean rooms, quiet patients, careful work. It wasn't. The hospital moved every 3 days, sometimes every day. Tents, tables made from doors laid across sawhorses, wounded men screaming, blood on her hands, blood on her apron, blood everywhere. There was never enough morphine, never enough bandages, never enough time. One night a soldier grabbed her wrist while she was changing his dressing. He was delirious. Infected wound, fever. He thought she was his wife. "Anna," he whispered. "Anna, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." She didn't correct him. She just held his hand until he stopped breathing. She was 19 years old. Now it was late January. The hospital was packing again. American forces were advancing faster than anyone expected. Orders came down: evacuate, move west, don't leave supplies for the enemy. Clara helped load the trucks. Her hands were small but efficient. Her father had taught her to move with purpose. No wasted motion, no hesitation. A nurse called her name. "Weiss, you're in truck 4. Clara nodded. She grabbed her small canvas bag. Inside, a change of clothes, a bar of soap, a photograph of her father. That was all she owned now. She climbed into the back of the truck. 11 other women were already there. Some she knew, most she didn't. They sat in silence as the truck started moving. Through the gap in the canvas cover, Clara could see the hospital tents being dismantled, folded, loaded, erased. 3 days later, the convoy was ambushed by American artillery. Not intentional, just bad luck. Wrong place, wrong time. The truck scattered. Clara's truck broke down. The driver disappeared. 14 women stood on a muddy road with nowhere to go. They walked 30 kilometers in 2 days. Clara's boots tore open her heels. She wrapped them in strips torn from her undershirt. The cloth turned red. She kept walking. On the 3rd day, they saw American jeeps blocking the road ahead. Everyone stopped. No one spoke. A young soldier stepped forward. He was maybe 19, pale, nervous. He held a rifle, but his hands shook. "Hände hoch," he said in terrible German. "Hands up." Clara raised her hands. So did the others. The soldier called over his shoulder, "Sergeant, we got women here." Another soldier appeared, older, tired eyes. He looked at the group of women. Then he looked at the young soldier. "What do we do with them?" the young soldier asked. The sergeant pulled out a radio. "This is Echo 2. We've got 14 German auxiliaries, female, unarmed, requesting instruction." The radio crackled. Static, then a voice. Same protocol as the men. "Process them. Move them to the holding area." The sergeant clipped the radio back to his belt. "You heard him, let's go." Clara's stomach dropped. Holding area, that was the word they used. The Cage, Cologne, February 1945. Sophie Hartman was the kind of person who noticed details. When she worked as a supply clerk, she noticed when inventory numbers didn't match. She noticed when someone forged a signature. She noticed when the officers' faces changed from confident to worried to afraid. She was 24, wore glasses, always carried a small notebook in her pocket, wrote everything down, dates, names, numbers. Her handwriting was precise, tiny, efficient. She'd been assigned to a Wehrmacht logistics office in Cologne. Boring work, stamping forms, filing reports, tracking shipments that never arrived. But it was safe, indoor, far from the fighting, until it wasn't. The Americans crossed the Rhine in March. The city evacuated in chaos. Sophie's office was abandoned in 2 hours. The officers left first, took the cars, took the radios, told the clerks to wait for transport. The transport never came. Sophie grabbed her coat and followed a convoy heading east. No one checked her papers. No one cared. She climbed into the back of a truck with 6 other women, strangers, all running from the same thing. Her brother was missing. Maya since the Battle of the Bulge. She didn't know if he was alive or dead, captured or buried in an unmarked grave. She only knew she had to survive long enough to find out. The truck drove for 3 days, stopped at checkpoints, refueled, kept moving. On the 4th day, they ran into an American roadblock. Jeeps, soldiers, rifles pointed. The driver stopped, put his hands up, got out slowly. The women in the back stayed frozen, silent. An American soldier opened the canvas flap, looked inside, saw 6 women staring back at him. Jesus, he muttered, they're all girls. He called for his commanding officer. A captain came over, looked inside, sighed. Out, he said in German. Raus, hands where I can see them. Sophie climbed out, her legs shook. She kept her notebook clutched against her chest, like it could protect her. The captain asked questions, names, units, assignments. Sophie answered in a quiet voice. Hartman Sophie, supply clerk, Cologne office. He wrote it down, moved to the next woman. When he finished, he gestured to a truck parked nearby. You're coming with us. Where Sophie asked, processing center. Sophie's throat tightened. She'd heard stories about processing centers. Everyone had. Whispered in barracks, repeated on the radio, warnings disguised as news. She climbed into the American truck because there was no choice. 6 women, no weapons, no plan, just obedience. The truck drove west, away from Cologne, away from everything familiar. Sophie opened her notebook, wrote the date, March 14, 1945, captured by American forces. Destination unknown. She underlined the word unknown twice. The prison camp appeared on the horizon like a scar on the landscape. It wasn't a building, just open fields surrounded by barbed wire. Guard towers at the corners, tents clustered in rows, mud everywhere. The truck stopped at the gate, soldiers checked papers, counted heads, processed the new arrivals like cattle. Martha Klein arrived first, March 15th. She stepped off the truck and looked around. The camp stretched in every direction. Hundreds of tents, thousands of people, all German, all prisoners. A guard pointed to a section on the east side. Women's area, that way. She walked, her boots squelched in the mud. Around her, other women walked in the same direction. Some crying, some silent, all afraid. The women's section was smaller than the men's. Maybe 40 tents, canvas, no floors, no heat, just dirt and cold. Martha was assigned to tent 12. 23 women inside, packed shoulder to shoulder. No beds, just thin blankets on the ground. She found a space near the back, sat down, pulled her knees to her chest. The woman next to her looked over. New Martha nodded. Where from signals unit? Bavaria. The woman grunted. I'm from a medical unit. Frankfurt. Name's Clara. Martha glanced at her. Young, blonde, tired eyes. Martha, she said. Clara nodded, then she turned away. Conversation over. Ellie Schmidt arrived 2 days later, March 17th. She didn't cry when the guards took her truck keys, didn't argue when they searched her pockets, just followed orders and kept her face blank. She was assigned to Tent 9, 18 women, all strangers. That night, she lay on the cold ground and stared at the canvas ceiling. Outside, she could hear voices, low, constant. the hum of fear. She closed her eyes but didn't sleep. Sophie Hartman arrived March 19th. She counted the tents as she walked through the camp, 42 in the women's section. She wrote it in her notebook. She was assigned to tent 12, same tent as Martha. When she sat down, Martha looked up, recognized her from somewhere. Maybe the convoy, maybe just the face of shared exhaustion. Sophie pulled out her notebook, started writing. Martha watched her for a moment. "What are you writing?" Martha asked. Sophie didn't look up. "Everything. Dates, names, what I see, what I hear. Why? Because if I survive this, I want to remember. And if I don't survive, maybe someone will find it." Martha had no response to that. By late March, the women's section held over 1,200 women. The camp had been designed for 400. There were no beds, no stoves, no showers, just cold and mud and canvas. The latrines were open pits. The smell carried across the camp in the wind. Food came once a day, thin soup, a piece of bread. Sometimes, not always. Women got sick, coughs, fevers, infections. Some died. Not many, but enough. The whispers started on the third night. Martha heard them while lying in the dark. A woman 2 spaces over was talking to her neighbor. Low voice, urgent. "I heard they take women out at night, one at a time. You don't come back the same." Martha's chest tightened. The woman continued. "My cousin was in a camp in the East. She said the Soviets did it there too. The Americans are no different." Martha wanted to cover her ears, wanted to unhear it, but the words were already inside her head. The next night, more whispers. Clara heard a different version. Someone said the Americans were separating women for interrogations. Special interrogations. No one knew what that meant. But the word special carried weight. It sounded deliberate, personal. Sophie heard a rumor about selections, women being chosen for labor, or worse. The details changed depending on who was telling the story, but the fear stayed the same. Ellie tried to ignore it all. She sat in her tent with her arms crossed and her jaw set. She'd survived bombs, survived losing her husband, survived 3 years of war. She refused to fall apart now. But even she felt it. The weight of waiting, the dread of not knowing. One evening she gathered a small group of women around her, spoke quietly but firmly. "Listen to me. Most of what you're hearing is nonsense, rumors. We have to stay calm." A young woman, maybe 20, looked at her with wide eyes. "But what if it's true? What if they do something to us?" Ellie's voice didn't waver. "They haven't. Not yet. So until something actually happens, we do not fall apart." It was a thin thread of logic, but it was all she had. In tent 12, Martha sat with her back against the canvas wall. She'd started keeping a diary, just a few lines each night, written in tiny script in the margins of an old supply manifest she'd found. Day 8, still cold, still waiting. Heard more stories today. Don't know what to believe. Don't know if it matters. She paused, then added one more line. "I'm afraid." She closed the paper and tucked it into her coat pocket. Across the tent, Sophie was writing too. Her notebook was filling up. Observations, details, names of women who'd gotten sick, women who'd died, the layout of the camp, guard rotations. Martha watched her. "Why do you write so much?" Sophie looked up. Her glasses reflected the dim light. "Because remembering is the only power we have left." Martha thought about that, then nodded. The propaganda had started long before the war ended. Martha remembered it clearly. Summer of 1944. She'd been in training at the Signal School in Munich. 50 women in a classroom, all between 18 and 25, all eager to serve, all believing they'd be kept safe. Obersturmführer Wilhelm Brenner had given the lecture. He was a tall man, 40 years old, SS uniform perfectly pressed. A scar ran down his left cheek, pale eyes that never blinked. He stood at the front of the room with his hands behind his back. When he spoke, his voice was calm, clinical, like a professor explaining mathematics. "You are serving the Reich in vital roles," he said, "but you must understand the enemy." He walked slowly across the front of the room. "The Americans, the British, the Soviets, they are not like us. They do not follow rules. They do not show mercy." He paused in front of a large poster, pulled it down to reveal another underneath. The poster showed a shadowy figure looming over a woman. The woman's face was twisted in fear. The text across the top read, Schütze deine Frauen, protect your women. Brenner tapped the poster with one gloved finger. In occupied zones, German women are treated as spoils of war. There is no law, no protection, no Geneva Convention for those who fall into their hands. Martha had felt her stomach turn. If you are captured, Brenner continued, his voice, still calm, still measured, you will wish you had died in the bombing instead. He let that statement hang in the air. Around her, Martha saw women go pale. One dropped her pen. It clattered on the floor. No one picked it up. Brenner continued for another hour. Stories, statistics, warnings, all delivered in that same cold clinical tone. When he finished, he left without answering questions. Martha sat in the classroom afterward, unable to move. The words echoed in her head. You will wish you had died. Now in the prison camp, those words came back. Every night, every whispered rumor, every moment of silence. She remembered another lecture, this one on the radio, late 1944. Joseph Goebbels himself. She'd been in her barracks, listening with a dozen other women. The voice came through the static, smooth, persuasive, and poisonous. The enemy advances, but do not surrender. Do not allow yourselves to be captured. The fate that awaits German women in enemy hands is worse than death. We have reports from the Eastern Front, testimonies, evidence. The Soviets show no mercy. The Americans are no different. Clara had been in that same barracks. She remembered grabbing the edge of the table, her knuckles white. A woman next to her whispered, "Is it true?" Clara didn't answer, didn't know how to. Sophie remembered the posters. They'd been everywhere, train stations, post offices, street corners. One showed a map of Germany with dark shadows creeping in from all sides. The text read, "The enemy is coming. Protect your home. Protect your honor." Another showed a woman's silhouette behind barbed wire. The text, "If you surrender, this is your future." Sophie had walked past those posters every day for a year, absorbed the message, internalized the fear. Now sitting in the camp, she understood. The propaganda hadn't needed evidence. It only needed repetition. Say something enough times. Show it enough times, and people start to believe, even when the evidence never comes. Ingrid Hoffman arrived at the camp on March 25th. She was 35. Older than most, a civilian secretary who'd worked at a Wehrmacht headquarters near the Rhine. When the staff evacuated, she'd begged to go with them. She had a husband, SS officer, missing since the Battle of the Bulge. She needed to survive long enough to find him. They'd let her climb into the back of a truck. No one checked her papers. When the truck was captured by American forces, Ingrid was among the 12 women taken prisoner. She was assigned to Tent 9, same tent as Ellie. From the first night, Ingrid was different. She didn't whisper. She spoke out loud. "I told you," she said, to no one in particular. "I told everyone. This is what happens when you surrender. This is what they warned us about." Ellie looked over. "Keep your voice down." Ingrid ignored her. "We should have fought. We should have run. Anything but this. You think running would have worked?" Ellie's voice was flat. "They have jeeps. We have feet. Do the math." Ingrid glared at her. "You've already given up." "No, I've accepted reality. There's a difference, O'Brien." Ingrid turned away, muttered something under her breath. Over the next days, she became the voice of resistance. Not physical resistance, ideological. She spoke the propaganda back into existence, repeated the warnings, reinforced the fear. Some women listened, some ignored her, but everyone heard. Ellie tried to counter it, tried to keep people calm, but Ingrid's voice was louder, more insistent. One night, Ingrid stood in the center of the tent. "They're going to separate us," she said. "You all know it. You've heard the stories. They'll take us one by one, and we won't come back." A young woman started crying. Ellie stood up. "Enough." Ingrid turned to her. "You want to pretend everything's fine? Go ahead, but don't drag the rest of us into your delusion." "I'm not delusional. I'm just not hysterical." The two women stared at each other. The tent went silent. Finally, Ingrid sat down, but the damage was done. The fear had been fed, and fear, once fed, grows. April 11th, night. The camp was quieter than usual. A cold wind blew across the fields. Canvas walls flapped. Women huddled under thin blankets. Martha lay awake. She'd been in the camp for almost a month, felt like a year. She thought about her mother, wondered if her father was still alive, wondered if her house in Bavaria was still standing. She thought about Brenner's lecture, "You will wish you had died." She thought about the posters, the broadcasts, the warnings, and she thought about the morning, tomorrow morning, because word had spread through the camp that something was happening. The guards had been walking through the tents, shouting orders. Everybody out at dawn. Line up in the yard. No explanation, no details, just the command. Martha's heart pounded. She pressed her hand against her chest, felt it hammering beneath her ribs. Across the tent, Sophie was awake too, writing in her notebook by the light of a stolen candle stub. "What are you writing?" Martha whispered. Sophie didn't look up. "My will, in case I don't make it past tomorrow." Martha's throat tightened. "You really think it's that bad?" Sophie finally looked at her. "I think we're about to find out." In Tent 9, Ellie sat with her back against the tent pole. Her hands were steady, her face was stone. But inside, her mind raced. She'd seen triage before. During the Ruhr bombings, doctors walking through rubble, deciding who could be saved, who couldn't. She wondered if tomorrow would be triage, or something worse. Beside her, a young woman named Liesel was crying, soft, muffled, trying to stay quiet. Ellie reached over, put a hand on Liesel's shoulder. "Breathe," she said. "Just breathe." Liesel nodded, but didn't stop crying. Across the tent, Ingrid was awake, staring at the canvas ceiling. Her lips moved silently. A prayer, or a curse, hard to tell. Clara was in Tent 12. She'd been coughing for 3 days. A wet, rattling cough that came from deep in her chest. She tried to hide it, tried to muffle it in her sleeve. But everyone heard. One woman moved away from her, then another. Fear of contagion. Clara didn't blame them. She'd seen what sickness could do in close quarters, seen it spread like fire. She wrapped her coat tighter, felt the cold seep into her bones. Tomorrow, she thought. Whatever happens tomorrow, I just need to survive it. She closed her eyes, prayed to a God she wasn't sure she believed in anymore. The night passed slowly. Women whispered. Women cried. Women stared into darkness in imagined horrors. At 4:30 in the morning, the guards came. Flashlights, boots, shouting. "Rouse, rouse, everybody out. Line up." Women stumbled from their tents, buttoning coats, pulling on boots. Some had no coats. Some had no boots. The yard was open. Bare dirt, patches of mud where rain had pooled, a fence on 3 sides, guard towers at the corners. The sky was gray, not yet dawn, just the pale edge of morning. 87 women formed uneven lines, shoulder to shoulder, breath visible in the cold air. No one spoke. The only sound was wind and the shuffle of feet. Martha stood in the 3rd row, counted the women in front of her. 23, counted again. 23. Her hands were shaking. She shoved them into her coat pockets, tried to make them stop. Behind her, someone coughed. The same wet, rattling sound Clara had been making for days. Sophie stood in the 2nd row, notebook in her coat, glasses slipping down her nose. She pushed them up with one finger. Ellie stood in the front row, face blank, jaw set, hands loose at her sides. Liesel stood near the back, crying. Greta stood beside her, held her hand. Ingrid stood in the 4th row. Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. They waited. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. 15. The sun began to rise. Pale light filtered through the clouds. Then the Americans arrived. 3 of them. A captain, clean uniform, polished boots, clipboard in hand, a medic, younger, tired eyes, canvas bag over his shoulder. A nurse, female, army uniform, calm expression. Behind them, a sergeant with a rifle, not pointed, just carried. The captain walked to the front of the 1st row, stopped, looked at the women. His face showed nothing, not anger, not pity, just professional detachment. He walked down the 1st row, slowly, deliberately, stopped in front of each woman, looked, wrote something on his clipboard, moved on. The medic followed, glanced at each woman, made notes. The nurse stood back, watching, waiting. Martha's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. She couldn't swallow, couldn't breathe. What is he writing, she thought. What does he see? The captain reached the end of the first row, turned, started down the second row. The silence was unbearable. Somewhere behind Martha, a woman started crying. Soft, muffled, trying to stay quiet. No one told her to stop. The captain reached the front of the second row, stopped in front of Ellie Schmidt. He looked at her, not her face, her frame, her shoulders, her hands. He looked for a long moment. Then he spoke. His voice was not loud, not harsh, but it cut through the cold air like a blade. Open your coat. 3 words. In English. Ellie understood English. She'd learned it in school, years ago, but for a moment her brain refused to process the meaning. She stared at him. He repeated it, slower this time. Open your coat. Her hands moved to the buttons, but they wouldn't obey. Her fingers were stiff, frozen, not from the cold, from fear. Behind her, the other women had heard the command. Even those who didn't speak English understood the gesture. The captain made a simple motion with his hand, mimicking the opening of a coat. Clara felt her knees weaken. She grabbed the arm of the woman next to her to stay upright. Sophie closed her eyes, thought she might be sick. Liesel's crying became audible. Greta tried to shush her, failed. Ingrid's lips moved silently. I told you, I told you. Martha's vision tunneled. The world narrowed to the captain's face, the medic's clipboard, the 3 words hanging in the air. This was it. This was the moment they'd been warned about. The moment the propaganda had described. The moment the whispered stories had promised. The moment when control was taken. When dignity was stripped. When the war stopped being about nations and became about bodies. Ellie finally moved her hands, unbuttoned her coat. 1 button. 2. 3. Her hands shook so badly she could barely manage. She pulled the fabric apart. Beneath it, a thin gray shirt, loose on her frame. She'd lost weight. They all had. She stood there, exposed, waiting. The medic stepped forward. Corporal James Hartley, 24 years old, Army medic for 2 years. He looked at her, not at her face, at her torso, her collarbone, her arms. His eyes were clinical, professional, no emotion. He made a note on his clipboard, nodded to the nurse. Then he moved to the next woman. That was it. That was all. Ellie stood there, confused, her coat still open, her heart still pounding. Slowly she closed her coat. Her hands trembled so badly she could barely fasten the buttons. The captain moved to the next woman. Open your coat. The command repeated, row by row, woman by woman. Some obeyed immediately, others hesitated. One woman tried to close her coat again after opening it. The sergeant stepped forward, not threatening, just firm. The order was given again. She complied. Martha's turn came. She'd watched it happen to 14 women before her. Watched the medic's eyes. Watched him write notes. Watched some women get pulled aside, led toward a tent at the edge of the yard. She didn't know what happened in that tent. When the captain stopped in front of her, she didn't wait for the command. She opened her coat, stared straight ahead, didn't look at him, didn't look at the medic, looked at the gray sky and disappeared inside her own mind. The medic glanced at her, wrote something, moved on. Martha closed her coat. Her hands shook so badly she could barely button it. The inspection continued, one by one, methodically, without emotion. The clipboard filled with notes. The women stood. The morning light grew brighter. And in the cold April air, fear turned into something sharper. Certainty. They had been right to be afraid. They had been right to believe the warnings. And now, whatever came next, there was nothing they could do but wait. Open your coat. 3 words in English. Ellie Schmidt understood English. She had learned it in school years ago. But for a moment, her brain refused to process the meaning. She stood in the front row. The captain's face was neutral, professional, waiting. Behind her, 86 women watched. Some understood the words, some didn't. But all of them understood the gesture when the captain raised his hand and mimed opening a coat. The sound that went through the crowd was not a scream. It was worse. It was the collective intake of breath, the sound of fear becoming real. Ellie's hands finally moved to her buttons, unfastened them one by one. The fabric of her coat pulled apart. Beneath it, her shirt hung loose. She'd lost 15 kilograms since January. Her belt was cinched tight and still her trousers sagged. She stood there, exposed to the cold morning air, exposed to the eyes of strangers, waiting for whatever came next. Corporal James Hartley stepped forward. He was young, maybe 24, dark hair, tired eyes. He carried a canvas medical bag over one shoulder and a clipboard in his left hand. He looked at Ellie, but not at her face. His eyes scanned her collarbone, sharp, jutting, sign of severe weight loss. Her hands, no blackened fingertips, no frostbite. Her neck, pale but not waxy, no immediate sign of tuberculosis. Her posture, steady, not swaying, not struggling to stand. He made a note on his clipboard. 3 words: severe malnutrition monitor. Then he looked at Nurse Lieutenant Mary Callahan and nodded. Callahan stepped forward. She was 29, from Boston, brown hair pulled back in a tight bun. She carried a wool blanket folded over her arm. She held it out to Ellie. Ellie stared at the blanket, didn't understand. Callahan spoke in broken German. Nehmen Sie, for you, take it. Ellie's hands moved automatically, took the blanket, felt the weight of it, the rough texture of military-issue wool. Her mind couldn't process what was happening. Callahan moved on to the next woman. Hartley was already there. Open your coat. The second woman complied, younger, maybe 22. Radio operator's insignia on her sleeve. Hartley scanned her the same way. Collarbone, hands, neck, posture. Made a note, moved on. No touching, no leering, no violence, just a glance and a note. Ellie stood there holding the blanket, her coat still open, her heart still hammering. What just happened? She closed her coat slowly, fingers numb, not from cold anymore, from shock. In the third row, Martha Klein watched. Her glasses had slipped down her nose. She didn't push them up, didn't move, just watched. She'd seen Ellie get a blanket, seen the medic write something and move on, seen no violence, no cruelty, just procedure. But her mind couldn't reconcile what she was seeing with what she'd been taught to expect. This has to be the beginning, she thought. The trick before the trap. The inspection continued down the first row. Woman after woman, the same process. Open your coat. Scan. Note, next. Some women were given blankets, others weren't. Martha couldn't see a pattern. One woman, number 7 in the first row, started to close her coat immediately after opening it. A reflexive motion, shame and fear. Sergeant Dawson stepped forward. He was 40, gray at the temples. He didn't point his rifle, didn't raise his voice, just stood there. The captain repeated the order. The order was given. You will comply. The woman opened her coat again, kept it open until Hartley finished his examination. Hartley noted something, signaled to Callahan. Callahan approached the woman, spoke gently. Come with me. Kommen Sie mit. The woman's eyes went wide. No. No, please. Callahan's voice stayed gentle. You need treatment, medical treatment. Verstehen? Understand. The woman looked around, searching for help, for escape, for anything, but there was nowhere to go. She followed Callahan toward the medical tent at the edge of the yard, walking slowly, like a prisoner to execution. The other women watched her go. Silence. Heavy, suffocating. She was taken. Martha's throat closed, her hands clenched inside her coat pockets. It's starting, she thought. It's finally starting. The captain moved through the second row. Same process, same clinical detachment. He reached woman number 12, a driver, broad shoulders, practical clothes. Open your coat. She complied immediately. No hesitation, face blank. Hartley examined her, noted moderate malnutrition, moved on. Woman number 13, a typist, small frame, shaking hands. Open your coat. She fumbled with the buttons, took 3 tries to unfasten them. When Hartley looked at her hands, he paused, leaned closer. Her fingertips were dark, mottled purple and red. He spoke to her in German, medical German, accented but clear. Remove the wrapping. The woman hesitated, then slowly unwrapped the strips of cloth around her hands. Her fingers were worse underneath. 2 fingernails had turned completely black. The flesh around them was swollen, infected. Hartley's jaw tightened, the first emotional reaction anyone had seen from him. This is advanced frostbite, he said to Callahan. She's been hiding it for days, maybe weeks. Callahan stepped forward, put a gentle hand on the woman's shoulder. "What's your name?" the woman whispered. "Clara. Clara Weiss. Clara, you need treatment now." "Will you come with me?" Clara's eyes filled with tears, not from pain, from something else, something she couldn't name. She nodded. Callahan led her toward the medical tent. Clara walked on unsteady legs, looked back once at the other women, then disappeared through the tent flap. In the remaining rows, the women watched. 2 taken now, both to the medical tent. No one knew what happened inside. Sophie Hartman stood in the second row. She'd been counting. 12 women examined so far. 2 taken, 10 given blankets or left alone. She was a clerk. She understood data, patterns, statistics. This doesn't match the warnings she thought. This doesn't match anything they told us. But the fear was still there, because data could lie, patterns could deceive, and statistics meant nothing when you were the one being examined. The captain reached the end of the second row, turned, started down the third. Martha was number 15. She watched him approach, watched his boots, polished, clean, so different from the mud-covered boots of Wehrmacht soldiers. He stopped in front of her. She didn't wait for the command, opened her coat immediately. The morning air hit her chest, cold, sharp. Hartley stepped forward, scanned her the same way he'd scanned everyone else. Collarbone, visible but not severe. Moderate weight loss, hands, no frostbite. Some chapping from cold but nothing serious. Neck, pale, slightly underweight, but no immediate danger signs. Breathing, steady, no rattle, no wheeze. He made a note, moderate malnutrition, monitor for respiratory infection. Then he moved on. That was it. Martha stood there, coat open, waiting for more. But there was no more. The captain was already at the next woman. Martha closed her coat, buttoned it with shaking hands. Her mind spun. He just looked. That's all. He just looked and wrote something and moved on. No touching, no commands, no cruelty, just a medical examination. But why row 3 continued? Woman after woman, the pattern held. Most were examined and released. A few were given blankets. 3 more were taken to the medical tent. One of those 3 was Liesl Bauer, 20 years old, switchboard operator. When the captain reached her, she was already crying, had been crying since dawn. "Open your coat," she complied, hands shaking so badly she could barely manage the buttons. Hartley started his examination. Got as far as her neck when Liesl suddenly doubled over. A violent coughing fit. She tried to muffle it, tried to stop, but her body wouldn't obey. The cough was wet, deep, rattling. When she finally straightened, there were flecks of blood on her sleeve. Hartley's expression changed, not alarm, just increased focus. He turned to Callahan. Stethoscope. Callahan handed it to him. Hartley pressed it against Liesl's chest. Over her shirt. Professional. "Quick. Breathe," he said in German. Liesl tried, gasped, coughed again. Hartley listened, moved the stethoscope, listened again. He pulled back, wrote something on his clipboard, showed it to Callahan. Callahan read it, nodded grimly. Hartley looked at Liesl. "You have pneumonia. Severe. You need antibiotics and rest. You're coming with us." Liesl's legs gave out. She collapsed to her knees. Callahan knelt beside her, put an arm around her shoulders. "Can you walk?" Liesl shook her head. Callahan looked at Hartley. "We need a stretcher." Hartley signaled to 2 soldiers standing near the medical tent. They came over with a canvas stretcher. Gently they helped Liesl onto it, lifted her. As they carried her past the rows of women, Liesl whispered, barely audible, "They're helping me. They're actually helping me." The women standing in formation heard it. Some didn't believe it. Some wanted to. Some didn't know what to think. Ingrid Hoffman stood in row 4. She was 35. Civilian secretary. True believer. She'd been muttering under her breath since the inspection started. Low enough that the guards couldn't hear. Loud enough for the women around her to catch fragments. This is how it starts. Make you think you're safe. Then they strike. The woman next to her, Brigitte Muller, finally spoke. Ingrid shut up. Ingrid turned to her. "You're blind. You're all blind. Can't you see what they're doing? I see them giving blankets and treating the sick." "That's what I see, Tree. That's what they want you to see." Brigitte's voice hardened. I lived through the last war. I know what real cruelty looks like. This isn't it. Ingrid's face flushed. You've already surrendered. In your mind, you've given up. No, I've accepted that we lost. There's a difference. Before Ingrid could respond, the captain reached them. He stopped in front of Ingrid. Open your coat. Ingrid stared at him, her jaw set, her hands clenched. She spoke in German, loud enough for everyone to hear. Number one, I will not. The captain's expression didn't change. He gestured to Greta Koch, who'd been serving as informal translator. Greta translated the captain's words. This is a medical inspection. You will comply. Ingrid's voice rose. I know what this is. You can't fool me. I will not participate in my own humiliation. Brigitte grabbed Ingrid's arm. Stop. You're making this worse. Ingrid jerked her arm away. From the front row, Ellie's voice cut across the yard. Clear. Firm. Ingrid, I have spent 28 years of my life not being weak. Open your coat, or I will come back there and open it for you. The entire yard went silent. Ingrid looked at Ellie, looked at the captain, looked at the rifle the sergeant was carrying. 10 seconds passed. Then slowly Ingrid unbuttoned her coat. Her hands shook. Not from fear, from rage. She opened the coat, stood there, glaring at everyone. Hartley stepped forward, examined her quickly. Moderate malnutrition, no immediate health concerns. He made a note, moved on. Ingrid stood there, coat still open, confusion replacing rage. She'd expected something, anything, but all she got was a glance and a note. She closed her coat. Her hands moved mechanically. Her mind struggled to process what just happened. The inspection continued through row 4, row 5, row 6. By the time the captain reached the final row, 40 minutes had passed. Hartley's clipboard was full of notes. 22 women flagged for immediate medical attention, 31 more for monitoring. The rest assessed as stable given current conditions. When the last woman was examined, Captain Thomas Mercer stepped to the front of the formation. He spoke in English. Greta translated. You will return to your tents. Those whose names are called will report to the medical facility for treatment. Everyone else dismissed. The women stood frozen for a moment, not sure if they had heard correctly. Dismissed, that was it. Slowly they began to move, turning, walking back toward the tents. No violence, no cruelty, just an examination and a dismissal. 17 women were held back, their names called. Among them Clara Weiss and Liesel Bauer. They were led to the medical tent. Inside cots had been set up. 12 of them, wool blankets, a small wood stove in the corner. Actual heat. Shelves along one wall held supplies, bandages, disinfectant, medicine bottles. More supplies than most Wehrmacht field hospitals had seen in months. Clara was led to a cot near the stove. Callahan helped her sit. Let me see your hands. Clara held them out, still wrapped in the dirty cloth strips. Callahan unwrapped them carefully, slowly. When the last layer came off, she exhaled softly. How long have you been hiding this? Clara's voice was barely a whisper. 2 weeks, maybe more. I lost track. Callahan nodded. Didn't scold, didn't judge, just started cleaning the wounds. This is going to hurt. I'm sorry. She swabbed the infected areas with antiseptic. Clara bit her lip. Didn't scream, didn't cry out. When Callahan finished cleaning, she applied fresh bandages, clean white gauze, proper medical tape. You're very brave, she said. How old are you? 19. Callahan paused, looked at Clara's face. Really looked. 19. God. She finished bandaging the hands, then brought a tin cup. Hot chocolate. From American Rations. Real cocoa powder mixed with hot water and condensed milk. Clara stared at it. Hadn't seen chocolate in 8 months. Steam rose from the cup. The smell was rich, sweet, overwhelming. Drink, Callahan said. Slowly. Your stomach isn't used to rich food. Clara took a sip. The warmth spread through her body. The taste was childhood, safety, home. She started crying, not from pain, not from fear, from the overwhelming sensation of being treated like a human being. Callahan put a hand on her shoulder. Let her cry, didn't rush her, didn't tell her to stop. On the cot next to Clara, Liesel lay wrapped in 2 blankets. Callahan had given her a dose of sulfanilamide, an antibiotic, scarce, valuable, usually reserved for American soldiers. But Liesel was dying of pneumonia, and Callahan's oath said treat the sick. It didn't specify nationality. Liesel's breathing was easier now. Not good, but better. She looked at Clara, saw the bandaged hands, the cup of chocolate, the tears. They're really helping us, she whispered. Clara nodded, couldn't speak yet. Across the tent, Hartley was treating another woman for an infected shoulder wound, cleaning it, applying sulfa powder, bandaging it properly. Captain Mercer stood near the entrance, watching, making sure everything ran smoothly. He'd been a lawyer before the war, JAG officer now. He believed in rules, in order, in the Geneva Convention. Article 3 was clear. Prisoners who are wounded or sick shall be collected and cared for. Not complicated, not optional, just the rule. He followed rules. That night, the women who'd been examined but not taken to the medical tent returned to their barracks. The whispers started immediately. In tent 12, Martha sat near the canvas wall. Sophie sat nearby, both silent. Finally, Sophie spoke. They didn't hurt anyone. Martha didn't respond. They gave blankets. They took the sick to be treated. Martha's voice was quiet. How do you know that's what they're doing? Sophie pulled out her notebook. I counted. 87 women examined, 17 taken to the medical tent. All 17 showed visible signs of illness or injury. Clara's frostbite, Liesel's pneumonia, others with infected wounds or severe malnutrition. So it was medical, just medical. Martha wanted to believe that, wanted to so badly it hurt. But years of propaganda don't dissolve in a single morning. In tent 9, Ellie sat with her new blanket wrapped around her shoulders. It was rough, military issue, smelled like mothballs and diesel fuel. But it was warm, and it was real. A woman approached her, young, maybe 23. They really just gave you that? For free, Ellie nodded. Why? Ellie thought about it. Because I was cold, and they had blankets. The woman sat down, absorbed that information. I thought she started, then stopped. Started again. I thought they would do terrible things to us. Ellie's voice was flat. So did I. But they didn't. No, they didn't. The woman wrapped her arms around herself. I don't understand. Neither do I. Across the tent, Ingrid sat alone, staring at nothing. Brigitte approached, sat down nearby, not too close, gave her space. You okay? Ingrid didn't answer. Brigitte tried again. It wasn't what you expected. No. Does that change anything? For you, Ingrid was quiet for a long time. Then so quietly, Brigitte almost didn't hear it. I don't know. In the medical tent, Clara lay on her cot, hands bandaged, stomach full for the first time in weeks. Warm. Callahan came by to check on her, adjusted her blankets, brought water. Clara looked up at her. Why are you helping me? Callahan paused, looked at her with tired but kind eyes. Because you're sick, and I'm a nurse, but I'm German. I'm the enemy. You're a 19-year-old girl with frostbite and malnutrition. That's all I see. Clara's eyes filled with tears again. Callahan squeezed her shoulder gently. Get some rest. We'll check your hands again in the morning. She moved to the next cot. Clara lay there, staring at the canvas ceiling. In her mind, she was still the enemy, a German, a member of the losing side, a prisoner. But Callahan hadn't treated her like an enemy. She treated her like a patient, like a person. The night deepened. The camp grew quiet. In tent 12, Martha pulled out her diary, wrote by the light of a stolen candle. Day 9. Something happened today that I cannot explain. We were inspected. We thought it would be the worst moment of our lives. But it wasn't. They looked at us like doctors look at patients. They gave blankets. They took the sick to be treated. Either everything we were told was a lie or this is the cruelest trick imaginable. I don't know which terrifies me more. She closed the diary, tucked it into her coat pocket. Across the tent, Sophie was writing too. The inspection was not punishment, she wrote. It was triage, medical triage, like hospitals do during bombings. Assess, prioritize, treat. They weren't evaluating us for cruelty. They were evaluating us for care. I've been thinking about the propaganda, the posters, the broadcasts, the warnings. All lies. Every single one. We were taught to fear monsters. But the Americans aren't monsters. They're just following their rules. And their rules say even enemies deserve medical treatment. She closed her notebook. In tent 9, Ellie lay down, wrapped in her blanket, staring at the canvas ceiling. She thought about the captain's face. Neutral, professional, no hatred, no cruelty, just a man doing his job. She thought about the medic, young, tired, examining women not as objects but as patients. She thought about the nurse, gentle hands, kind voice, following the rules. That was all. And somehow the rules had saved them. For the first time in months, Ellie felt something she'd almost forgotten. Not happiness, not relief, just the absence of immediate terror. It was enough. In the medical tent, Clara finally fell asleep, her breathing steady, her hands bandaged and clean. Liesel slept too, the antibiotics working, the infection retreating. Callahan made her rounds, checked pulses, adjusted blankets, made notes. At the tent entrance, Hartley stood with Captain Mercer. 17, Hartley said. 17 would have died within 2 weeks if we hadn't intervened. Mercer nodded. And now maybe 1 or 2. We caught most of them in time. Good. They stood in silence for a moment. Sir Hartley said, the women were terrified. I mean, genuinely terrified. One asked me why we were helping her, like she couldn't comprehend it. Mercer sighed. Propaganda. Goebbels spent years convincing them we're monsters. How do we show them we're not? We don't show them anything, Corporal. We just follow the rules. Geneva Convention, Article 3. Prisoners who are wounded or sick shall be collected and cared for. That's it. We do what's right. The rest will follow. Hartley nodded. Mercer looked out over the camp. Rows of tents, barbed wire, guard towers. This war will end soon, he said. Days, maybe weeks. And when it does, these women will go home. They'll remember this. What we did here, how we treated them, and maybe, just maybe, it'll make a difference. Not in the grand scheme, not in history, just in their lives. And that's enough. He turned and walked back to his office. Hartley stayed a moment longer, then returned to the medical tent. The night passed. In tent 12, Martha dreamed of her mother, of home, of Bavaria before the war. In tent 9, Ellie slept without nightmares for the first time in months. In the medical tent, Clara's hands began to heal. And slowly, very slowly, understanding began to replace fear. Clara Weiss returned to the barracks the next morning. Her hands were wrapped in clean white bandages. Her face had color. She had slept in warmth for the first time in months. She had been given hot soup and real bread and medicine. When she stepped through the tent flap of tent 12, 86 pairs of eyes turned to stare. The silence was heavy, waiting, hoping, needing to know. Clara stood into the doorway, uncertain, not sure what to say or how to say it. Women stood up, gathered around her, not too close, just close enough to see, to hear, to understand. Ellie spoke first, her voice practical, direct. They treated you? Clara nodded. Her voice was soft. The nurse Callahan, she cleaned my fingers. She said 2 might be saved. The others might not. But she was kind, she was careful. Martha stepped forward. They didn't hurt you. Clara shook her head. No, they gave me medicine and bread. Real bread. The word real hung in the air. Such a small word. Such enormous weight. Sophie pulled out her notebook. Started writing. The word real broke something in us. Not our fear. Fear still remained. But our certainty, the certainty that the enemy was evil. That capture meant suffering. That mercy was impossible. That certainty cracked. A woman named Greta approached Clara. Can I see? Clara held out her bandaged hands. Greta looked at them, touched the gauze gently. It was clean, white, professional. They used real medical supplies on you, Greta said. Not rags, not dirty cloth, real bandages. Clara nodded. Why would they waste supplies on us? Another woman asked. We're prisoners. We're nothing to them. Brigitte Muller spoke up. She was the oldest, 30 years old, had lived through World War I as a child. Because their rules say they have to, Brigitte said. Geneva Convention. Prisoners who are sick get treated. Doesn't matter which side they're on. Ingrid's voice came from the back of the tent. Cold, skeptical. You believe that? You really believe they're following rules? Brigitte turned to face her. I believe what I saw. Clara went into that tent yesterday looking like death. She came back looking like someone who slept in a bed and ate a meal. Either they're treating her or they're very good actors. Ingrid had no response. Clara moved to her old space in the tent, sat down carefully. Her hands still hurt, but the pain was different now. Not the sharp agony of infection, just the dull ache of healing. Women gathered around, asking questions, wanting details. What was it like inside the tent? Warm. There was a stove and cots with blankets. What did they give you to eat? Soup, chicken soup, and bread with butter. Real butter. Did they ask you questions? Only medical ones. How long had I been hiding the frostbite? Did I have pain? Could I move my fingers? Did they speak German? The nurse did. Not perfect, but enough. Were they cruel? Clara paused, thought about how to answer. No, they were professional, like doctors, like my father used to be. Her voice broke on the last word. Martha sat down beside her, put a hand on Clara's shoulder. Your father would be proud, Martha said quietly. You survived. Clara nodded, wiped her eyes with her sleeve. That afternoon, Liesel Bauer returned. She had been in the medical tent for 3 days. Severe pneumonia. The medics had given her antibiotics, sulfanilamide tablets, scarce medication, usually reserved for American troops. But Nurse Callahan had looked at Liesel's lungs and made a decision. This girl needs treatment, so she got treatment. When Liesel walked into Tent 9, she was still weak, still pale, but breathing clear. Ellie stood up, walked over to her. You look better. Liesel nodded. I can breathe. I couldn't breathe before. Now I can. What did they do? Medicine, antibiotics, and rest. They made me rest. Ellie studied her face. You really think they saved your life? Liesel's voice was quiet but certain. I know they did. I was dying. I could feel it. Every breath hurt. Every cough brought up blood. And now I'm standing here talking to you. She paused. The nurse Callahan. She checked on me every few hours, day and night. She brought me water. She adjusted my blankets. She listened to my lungs with a stethoscope and told me I was getting better. Did she have to do that? The checking on you, the caring? Liesel thought about it. No, she could have given me the medicine and left me alone. But she didn't. She treated me like I mattered. Around the tent, women listened, absorbing, processing. One woman spoke up. But why? Why would they care if we live or die? Liesel's answer was simple. I asked Nurse Callahan that same question. She said, because you're sick and I'm a nurse. That's all. The woman frowned. That doesn't make sense. Doesn't it? Bridget's voice cut in. A nurse treats the sick. That's what nurses do. It's not about politics or war or who's winning. It's about someone bleeding and someone else knowing how to stop it. Ingrid spoke from her corner. Her voice had lost some of its edge. But not all. You're all so eager to trust them, to believe their kindness is real. What if this is just the beginning? What if they're building trust so they can break it later? Ellie turned to face her. Then let them. Let them build trust and break it. At least Clara's hands are bandaged. At least Liesel can breathe. At least we're alive to see whatever comes next. Ingrid looked away. That night, the conversations in the barracks grew bolder. Women who had been silent for days began to speak. They shared what they had seen, what they had felt, what they had expected versus what actually happened. In Tent 12, Martha listened. Sophie spoke first, analytical, logical. I've been reviewing my notes. 87 women inspected, 17 taken for immediate treatment. All 17 showed visible medical need. Frostbite, pneumonia, infected wounds, severe malnutrition. She paused. This wasn't random selection. This was medical triage. They were prioritizing who needed help first, like doctors do during bombings. A woman named Anna spoke up. But the propaganda said they would hurt us, use us, treat us like animals. Sophie adjusted her glasses. The propaganda lied. The tent went quiet. Sophie continued. I've been thinking about Obersturmführer Brenner, the lectures he gave, the stories about Allied brutality, the warnings about capture. She looked around the tent. He lied to us. Goebbels lied to us. Every poster, every broadcast, every warning, all lies, designed to keep us loyal, keep us fighting, keep us afraid. But why, Anna asked. Why lie about that? Because fear is a weapon, Brigitte said. She was sitting near the tent flap, and the people who wield it are more dangerous than any soldier. Martha pulled out her diary, started writing. Day 10, Clara and Liesel returned, both treated, both healing. I've been thinking about the inspection, about the 3 words that terrified us. Open your coat. We thought those words meant the end, meant violation, meant everything we'd been warned about, but they just meant a doctor needed to see if we were sick. That's all, just 3 words, just a medical exam, and our fear turned them into monsters. She paused, then added one more line. The enemy in my mind was worse than the enemy in front of me. 2 weeks passed. The war in Europe ended on May 8th. The announcement came over loudspeakers in the camp, in German and English. Germany has surrendered unconditionally. The war is over. The women heard it in their barracks. Some cried. Some sat in silence. Some felt nothing at all. Martha felt tired, just tired. In Tent 9, Ellie sat with her blanket wrapped around her shoulders, the same blanket the nurse had given her during the inspection. She'd kept it close ever since. A young woman sat down next to her. What happens to us now? Ellie shrugged. They'll process us. Send us home. Eventually, home. The word felt strange. Martha's home in Bavaria might be rubble. Clara's home in Frankfurt might not exist anymore. Sophie's family in Cologne might be dead. Home was a concept, not a certainty, but it was something. On May 15th, Ingrid Hoffman broke. It happened quietly. No drama, no scene, just a conversation in the dark. Clara couldn't sleep. Her hands still ached at night. She sat near the tent flap, trying not to wake the others. Ingrid was sitting there too, staring at nothing. Clara spoke softly. You're awake. Ingrid nodded. Didn't look at her. Can't sleep either, no. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Clara spoke again. I've been thinking about what you said, that this is a trick, that they're building trust to break it later. Ingrid's voice was flat. And I don't think you believe that anymore. Ingrid finally looked at her. What makes you say that? Because you're still here, still alive, and nothing bad has happened. No violence, no cruelty, just medical treatment and blankets and food. Ingrid's hands clenched. It has to be a trick. Because if it's not a trick, then everything I believed, everything my husband believed, everything we fought for was built on lies. Her voice broke. Clara waited, let the silence settle. Then she spoke, gently. My father was a doctor. He used to say that the hardest part of medicine isn't treating the wound. It's admitting you were wrong about the diagnosis. Ingrid looked at her. Clara continued. You were told the enemy was monstrous. You believed it because everyone you trusted told you it was true. But now you've seen something different, and you have to choose. Keep believing the lie, or accept the truth. Ingrid's eyes filled with tears. My husband died believing that lie. He died fighting because he thought surrender meant death or worse. Clara's voice was soft. I'm sorry, truly, but his death doesn't make the lie true. Ingrid started crying. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet, broken sobs. All those warnings, she whispered, all those stories. And they gave me a blanket. They gave Liesel medicine. They saved your hands. She looked at Clara. What was it all for? Clara had no answer. So she just sat there. Let Ingrid cry. After a long time, Ingrid spoke again. I don't know how to let go of what I believed. Clara's response was gentle. Maybe you don't have to let go all at once. Maybe you just start by accepting what's right in front of you. We're alive. We're being treated with basic decency. That's real. Start there. Ingrid nodded slowly, wiped her eyes. They sat together in the dark. 2 women who had been enemies in ideology, now just 2 people trying to survive. June 1945. The camp began releasing prisoners. Women were processed in groups, paperwork filled out, destinations recorded, transportation arranged. It was slow. The infrastructure was broken, roads damaged, trains limited, but it was happening. Martha Klein was released June 20th, assigned transport back to Bavaria. She carried her diary in her coat pocket. Everything she owned fit in a small canvas bag. Before she left, she found Sophie. They'd become friends. Quiet friendship, built on shared silence and understanding. You'll write to me, Martha asked. If I can find you, Sophie said. If the postal system works. If anything works. Martha smiled. Small, tired. Try anyway. Sophie nodded. They hugged. Brief, awkward, sincere. Then Martha climbed onto a truck heading south. She looked back once, saw the camp, the tents, the wire, the place where her certainty had shattered and something new had taken its place. She didn't know what to call that new thing yet. Not forgiveness, not trust, just understanding. Understanding that propaganda could lie louder than truth, that fear could distort reality, that even enemies could follow rules, and sometimes those rules saved lives. Ellie Schmidt was released July 5th. She returned to the Ruhr Valley, found her old neighborhood bombed to rubble, found a room in a boarding house, found work in a bakery. She kept the blanket. For 30 years she kept it, folded carefully in a drawer. The wool thinned, the edges frayed, but she couldn't let it go. In 1970, her niece asked about it. "What's this old blanket?" Aunt Ellie held it, ran her fingers over the rough fabric. "A reminder," she said. "Of what?" "That in the worst moment of my life, when I had nothing and expected cruelty, someone saw my suffering and chose to help. Not because they had to, because their rules said they should." Her niece frowned. "That's all, just a blanket?" Ellie's voice was soft. "Sometimes a blanket is enough." She folded it carefully. "Put it back in the drawer." When Ellie died in 1975, her niece donated the blanket to a museum. It sits now in the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, in a glass case, with a placard explaining its history. U.S. Army issue 1945, given to German prisoner of war during medical inspection, kept for 30 years as proof that even in war, humanity can survive. Clara Weiss lost 2 fingers to frostbite. The doctors at the camp tried to save them, but the damage was too severe. The tissue was dead. Amputation was necessary. Clara learned to write with her left hand, learned to button shirts and tie shoes and do everything with 8 fingers instead of 10. She became a teacher in Munich, taught children to read and write and think. When students asked about her hand, she would say an accident. Long ago, it was easier than explaining the cold, the fear, the moment when an American medic looked at her ruined fingers and said, "We'll do what we can." They couldn't save her hand, but they saved her life. She married in 1950, had 4 children, 9 grandchildren, lived until 2003. In her final years, she spoke openly about the war, about the camp, about the inspection. She was interviewed by a university historian in 1998. The interviewer asked, "Were you angry at the Americans for not saving your fingers?" Clara smiled, tired but genuine. "No, I was grateful they tried. I was 19 years old, starving, freezing, infected. I should have died in that camp, but I didn't, because a nurse named Callahan saw me as a person who needed help, and she helped me." She held up her damaged hand. "This hand taught hundreds of children to read. This hand held my babies. This hand wrote letters and cooked meals and did all the things hands do. It's not perfect, but it's enough." The interviewer asked one more question. "What do you want people to know about that time?" Clara thought for a long moment. "I want them to know that propaganda is a weapon, and the people who wield it don't care about truth. They care about control. We were taught to fear the Americans, taught to see them as monsters. And when we finally met them, they gave us blankets and medicine and basic human decency. Not because they liked us, because their rules said we deserved it." She paused. Rules matter. Even in war, maybe especially in war. Sophie Hartman found her brother alive. He'd been held in a French prisoner camp, released in August 1945, returned to Cologne skeletal and traumatized, but alive. Sophie cried when she saw him, held him, felt his ribs through his shirt in his trembling hands, and knew he'd suffered too. They rebuilt together, found an apartment, found work. Sophie became a translator for the Allied occupation government. The irony wasn't lost on her. The language she'd feared now paid her wages. She married in 1948, had 2 daughters, worked for 30 years translating documents and facilitating communication between Germans and Americans. She was interviewed in 2005, age 84, sharp mind, clear memory. The interviewer asked about the camp, about the inspection. Sophie's answer was precise, analytical. The Americans weren't kind because they liked us. They weren't cruel because they hated us. They simply followed their rules. And their rules said prisoners deserved medical care. That distinction saved us. She adjusted her glasses. Same gesture she'd made 80 years earlier in the camp. I spent my life working in translation. Words matter. Definitions matter. We were defined as prisoners, not victims. Prisoners have rights under international law. That legal distinction meant everything. Lieselbauer recovered fully from pneumonia. The antibiotics worked. Her lungs healed. She returned to her parents' farm in the countryside, helped with harvest, married a neighbor's son in 1950. She had 4 children, 9 grandchildren, lived until 2008. In 2000, she was interviewed for an oral history project, age 75. Gray hair, gentle smile. The interviewer asked about the camp, about nearly dying, about being saved. Liesel's voice was soft but certain. I was 20 years old. I thought I was going to die in that camp. I thought the Americans would do terrible things to us. Instead, they gave me medicine and soup and a warm bed. A nurse named Callahan sat with me when I couldn't sleep. She didn't have to do that, but she did. She paused. I have never forgotten that. I never will. When my grandchildren ask me about the war, I tell them this. Propaganda teaches you to hate. Experience teaches you to see. I was taught to hate the Americans. But when I met them, I saw human beings following rules. And those rules saved my life. Martha Klein returned to Bavaria. Her father was alive. Her house was damaged but standing. She helped rebuild, worked as a clerk, kept her diary. In 1955, she attended a conference in Geneva, a symposium on the Geneva Conventions, international law, prisoner treatment. During a break, she met Captain Thomas Mercer. He was there as a speaker, discussing the implementation of convention protocols in the final months of the war. Martha approached him after his talk, introduced herself. I was one of the women in your camp, near the Rhine, April 1945. Mercer looked at her, recognition flickering. I remember the medical inspection. Martha nodded. I want to thank you. Mercer looked surprised. For what? For following the rules, for treating us like human beings, for showing me that the enemy I feared was worse than the enemy I met. Mercer was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke. I was just doing my job, following the convention. Nothing heroic, just procedure. Martha smiled. Sometimes procedure is heroic. Sometimes just following the rules is the bravest thing you can do. They talked for an hour, shared perspectives, shared memories. Before they parted, Mercer asked, do you still have nightmares? Martha thought about it. Sometimes. But not about that morning, not about the inspection. I dream about the fear I felt, the certainty I had that something terrible was coming. And then I wake up and remember nothing terrible came. Just a doctor doing triage. And somehow that's more powerful than any nightmare. Mercer nodded. I hope you find peace. Martha's smile was sad but genuine. I'm trying, every day. 2015, 70 years later. The National World War II Museum in New Orleans opened a new exhibition, Women of World War II, Untold Stories. Among the artifacts, Ellie Schmidt's blanket, Clara Weiss's medical records, Lieselbauer's testimony, Sophie Hartman's notebooks, and Martha Klein, 92 years old, in a wheelchair, gray hair, sharp eyes behind thick glasses. Her granddaughter pushed the wheelchair through the exhibition, stopped in front of the display case holding Ellie's blanket. The placard read, U.S. Army Issue 1945, given to German prisoner of war during medical inspection at a camp near the Rhine. This blanket represents the gap between fear and reality, between propaganda and truth. Sometimes the most powerful act of war is mercy. Martha's granddaughter read it aloud, then looked down at her grandmother. Oma, this was you. You were there, Martha nodded. Me and 86 others. Were you really that scared? Martha paused, remembering. Yes, more than you can imagine. But they didn't hurt you, no. They followed their rules, and their rules said even enemies deserve to be treated as human beings. The granddaughter was quiet, processing. Martha reached out, touched the glass case. Her fingers trembled slightly. I am 92 years old now, she said softly. I have lived a long life. a good life. But I have never forgotten that morning in April 1945. She looked at her granddaughter. 3 words changed everything. Open your coat. We thought those words meant the end. They meant the beginning of understanding that fear can lie louder than truth, the beginning of knowing that even in war, humanity can survive, the beginning of hope. Her granddaughter squeezed her hand. They sat there for a long time, an old woman and a young girl, separated by 70 years but connected by a story that needed to be told. Finally, Martha spoke one more time. Tell this story when I'm gone. Tell people what really happened, not the propaganda version, not the simplified version. The truth, that 87 women stood in a cold yard expecting monsters and met human beings, that sometimes the enemy is just fear itself. And that rules simple rules about treating the sick and clothing the cold, those rules can save lives. The granddaughter nodded. I will, Oma. I promise. Martha smiled, closed her eyes, rested her hand on the wheelchair arm. Around them, the museum continued. Visitors walking, reading, learning. And in a glass case, a faded wool blanket remained. Proof that even in the darkest times, even in the worst moments, humanity could choose mercy over cruelty. Not because it was easy, because it was right. Of the 80,000 German women held in Allied prisoner camps in Western Europe in 1945, fewer than 2% died. Medical care was provided according to Geneva Convention protocols. Food was distributed, blankets were given, the sick were treated. This is not a story of perfect people. Americans made mistakes. The camps were harsh. Conditions were difficult. But the systematic brutality that German women had been taught to expect did not occur. The propaganda had lied. And in the gap between the lie and the truth, 87 women learned a lesson that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. Sometimes the most terrifying moments are not acts of cruelty. They are moments of uncertainty, moments when we do not know what comes next. And sometimes what comes next is not what we feared. Sometimes it is simply human beings following rules, treating prisoners as patients, offering blankets to those who are cold, saving lives because the law says those lives deserve to be saved. Not heroic, not dramatic, just right. And sometimes that is everything. The exhibition remained open for 2 years. Thousands visited, read the stories, saw the artifacts, learned about women whose names had been forgotten by history but whose experiences mattered. Martha Klein died in 2016, 93 years old, peacefully, surrounded by family. Her diary was donated to the museum, placed in the archives, available to researchers, a primary source, a first-hand account. On the last page written in 2015, one final entry. I have lived long enough to see the truth acknowledged, to see the story told, to know that what we experienced mattered. We were taught to fear. We learned to see. That is the lesson. Not that Americans were saints, not that war is anything but brutal, but that even in war rules can hold. Humanity can survive. And sometimes the enemy in your mind is far worse than the enemy in front of you. I hope whoever reads this remembers that. Fear is a weapon. Truth is the shield. Choose truth. Martha Klein, April 1945. Remembered 2016. The end.